Hey Eleanor, how you doing?
Hi. Yeah, very good. Thank you so much for having me on.
No, it's my absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's so good to have you on because, as I was saying to you before we hit record, whenever I see something that's out there and it's a problem that's existed, literally, I mean, like obviously we'll talk about it a bit more, but the problem of sexual harassment and all of that stuff is a problem that's existed for literally since the beginning of time. Like it's existed for so long. So whenever I see problems like that that have existed for so long, and then there's a new technology such as big data or blockchain or artificial intelligence that have come up and they're solving that problem. Those sort of things really excite me because it's a problem that couldn't have been solved before, and now there's something there that's really helping it. So that I've basically explained a little bit what you guys do already, but yeah, that's why I really wanted to have you on in the first place.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I completely agree. It's I think one of the main problems when dealing with sexual harassment is a lack of data. And so that's something that we're really trying to solve, and to pull insights from that data and actually come with the best solution for it.
Mm. So is that kind of how Metaspace was born? Out of like a whole, I guess you saw the problem as sexual harassment existed. You also, I think, like you studied data at university. You kind of thought, how can I marry these two things together to solve that problem?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I, we really, saw sexual harassment as such a large problem, and one of the main issues to it is reporting. So about 99.8% of individuals who experience sexual harassment don't report it. And so that's obviously awful on an individual side. And a majority, like we're concentrating on the B2B workplaces, and a majority of individuals in the workplace have experienced sexual harassment in one point of their working career. So the data that we've been able to find is that 60% of women and a third of all men experience sexual harassment at work. So,
Mm.
we knew it was a huge ethical issue. And then we started digging deeper and deeper into, okay, what are the actual effects on companies? And that's when we found, like, a huge kind of all these hidden costs of sexual harassment on companies. So this includes, dips in productivity, um, increase in absenteeism, increase in staff turnover, which obviously is just bad business for companies.
Yeah.
And so, that linked with, so you have the ethical and the financial, and then on the legal side, there's a new framework coming to force in December of this year that states that all EU companies must have a whistleblowing reporting system. So we're also
Mm.
plugging into that. So um, our tech is kind of to allow companies to be compliant as well as specialized in sexual harassment.
That's so cool. So I mean, before we go on to, I guess, the sexual harassment problem, I'd love to kind of dive into the tech a little bit because, like, what is it? What aspect of the sexual harassment reporting? What aspect of that does this new technology or like the new solutions that you've created? Like, what specifically does that solve? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so previously in the workplace, if you were experiencing a sexual harassment case, you would either go to your HR manager or your line manager. So that's kind of tends to be company policy. The issue with that is obviously people don't usually feel comfortable coming forward with it, and that's it tends to be linked to the fear of repercussions, and that fear of
Mm.
repercussions is actually a very correct fear to have, because actually when people do report sexual harassment in the workplace, you know genuinely they're then seen as a troublemaker, and a lot of people leave their jobs. So in general, women tend to be more likely to resign from a job than to report a case of sexual harassment. So firstly, like, the main issue that we're trying to solve is actually improve reporting. So
Yeah.
that's very simply is allowing people to be anonymous but still having a kind of connection there. So the reason why anonymity is so feared within companies is, one, a fear of false reports, and secondly, their inability then to actually deal with the case. So we're solving that problem with providing as much evidence as possible, for the company to then have it all in one place. And then afterwards, so we have the reporting application for the employee, and then on the company side, we have a case resolution center. So then they can see all the reports coming in one place. And if the the case is anonymous, they can still actually contact that individual with our in-app messaging. So you can still actually
Mm.
try to resolve the case even if the person is anonymous.
It seems like a solution like that should have existed a long time ago, because like you get say company-wide feedback forms to basically like rate the companies, like I don't know,
Yeah,
healthcare benefits and stuff like that, right? And they're all anonymous. Like I
yeah,
haven't come across one where it's not anonymous, because that's when the best data comes in, the best quality data comes in, because people aren't worried about that repercussion aspect of, like, people are honest at the end of the day.
yeah.
That's what being anonymous gives you. So why has that not existed in the space of sexual harassment, where it has, the repercussions of that are way stronger than rating your healthcare benefits or your holiday days or whatever like that, because that has repercussions on, say, like emotional health. It has
Yeah.
repercussions on so many different aspects of the company as well, as you mentioned before. So but my question is why.
Yeah, I'd break it down into two main points. So firstly, I think previous decision makers and companies didn't realize that sexual harassment was actually a problem. I mean, we're still encountering that today when we speak to and go to speak to companies. They're like, "Yeah, but it doesn't happen here. It happens in every single company." And and we know this because the majority of individuals experience sexual harassment, especially. People are always shocked when they hear that a third of men experience sexual harassment. It's an issue for men as well.
Mm,
So firstly, just the thought that okay, sexual harassment isn't a problem, so we don't need to deal with it. That, and then the second one, I think what we encounter the most is this fear of false reporting. That if someone's anonymous, then they'll just make something up to be malicious, to advance their careers, to destroy someone else's. Um, Nonetheless, there's no statistical evidence of actual any kind of false reports coming in when someone becomes anonymous with a sexual harassment case. And obviously, I
mm,
mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that one of the main issues with sexual harassment specifically is a lack of data. So that's something that we're definitely trying to encourage. But like a comparable data set is false reports for assault and rape, and they estimate that between 2 and 5% of cases reported are false, which is still under the average for any other crime. So this fear of false reporting clearly stems from something else, and that's the belief of perhaps like not necessarily believing women coming forward. So that's why it's
mm.
so important to like, when someone comes forward with a sexual harassment case, conventionally they have to prove that what they're saying is true, which
Yeah.
instead of being believed straight away, there's immediately when someone comes forward with a case, they're not believed until they have proof. And unfortunately, with sexual harassment, there's very little proof usually because you don't have a time-stamped evidence of what happened. So that's what we're
Mm.
trying to do is kind of create more of an evidence-based reporting system.
But that problem might still exist where, I mean, obviously, because there might not be cameras inside the office, like it might have even happened outside the
Yeah.
office. Like there's so many different aspects, right? Like, so if that is a problem that exists where, the evidence might not be there, the timestamp issue, like that's probably a big issue as well, right? The timestamp would probably help to an extent, but there must be other sort of ways to remedy that, right?
Yeah. So we one of the main data that we've been able to extract as well has been that when a case is actually reported by a witness, it's actually accelerates. It's like 3 times more likely to be resolved. So we also have a witness and a bystander option. So if you actually see something,
Mm,
or even like your friend at work is being sexually harassed, but they don't feel comfortable coming forward, you can do it for them again anonymously if you choose to be. Um,
yeah.
so I think it's still a problem, and the other way that we're trying to solve it is by when you go into the application, you don't actually have to submit the report straight away. You can just log in incidents. So by logging in
Yeah.
incidents, that's where you have kind of that timestamp to say, this time, like he did this to me. Like although it's not like a picture of this person
Mm,
sexually harassing you, it still shows that you've gone to the effort of actually like writing in at this time to keep it as evidence. Um, so yeah, it's not like a complete solution to the problem, but that's also why alongside the reporting and the case resolution, we've integrated them with the NLP, and that's what like is currently under development.
What's the sort of end goal for Metaspace? Is it to kind of remedy? the reporting aspect, or is it more overarching as to, you know, sexual harassment in the workplace is a problem? Let's analyze each pain point of why, let's eradicate it based on,
Yeah.
like, I don't know if eradication is
No, that's
realistic
the
given that
correct
this
term though.
really.
Yeah.
Okay, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean,
It's just
we
it's just a difficult target. That's why I said.
absolutely, like we want to make ourselves useless. Like our whole goal,
Mm,
and we define ourselves as a B2B platform to help companies eradicate sexual harassment. That's our ultimate goal. Yeah, it's a huge problem and it's a big task, but it doesn't mean, you know, I think for so long people have steered away from sexual harassment because of this fear that it is such a big problem, but you have to start somewhere. So that's, you
yeah.
know, and that's why, you know, we know that today is the era of big data. So if we can help and create a positive social impact on the lives of working individuals today through these insights, then, you know, even better.
Is it technology? Obviously, there's the aspect, as you said before, of companies and people and society taking sexual harassment more seriously compared to
Hmm.
before. But from a technological standpoint, what's kind of, I guess, been innovated in the world? What technology has been innovated to enable you to be able to offer this solution that you can today?
Yeah,
As in, could you
I
have done this a few years ago, basically, or like 10 years ago?
Yeah, so in terms, so NLP is natural language processing, and in its, you know, most simple definition, it's how a computer understands written text, and that's something that's kind of advanced in leaps and bounds in the last, you know, couple of years, especially with like the creation of different NLP models by Google, and it basically means that their accuracy scores are just really, really high when you're modeling natural language processing algorithms. So that's something that we couldn't have done before, and now we have the
Mm.
opportunity to do so with these models. And but then on the other side, the reporting, the case resolution isn't something that's new technologically. It's just new for the sexual harassment and whistleblowing space.
Talk a bit about that natural language processing. Just to, I guess, like, I don't really know how that works. I guess like people listening won't know how that works. Just, I guess, in layman's terms, of like, just to simplify it a bit,
Mhm.
what does that mean, and how does it benefit the whole sexual harassment space in the company?
Yeah, so the goal of the natural language processing is to be preventative, and the with us specifically, what we want to use the algorithm for is to detect sexual harassment occurring in real time in written communications at the workplace.
Okay.
So I think the best is if I give you an example. If I say, for example, "Oh, you look so good today," if we have a good relationship or, you know, a friendly relationship, that's not necessarily sexual harassment. But sexual
Mm.
harassment is a spectrum and it depends on context. If actually we don't have an existing relationship or you're not comfortable with that, that's wildly inappropriate thing to say in the workplace. Um, so if I was to write that to you, for example, on Slack or workplace platform, you would receive a pop up saying, "Oh, if there's something that makes you feel uncomfortable, like remember you can report it." If you say yes, then the algorithm learns that that's a case of sexual harassment for you, and
Mm.
so that it becomes more sensitive to future messages that I send. But if you say no, then the algorithm also learns. So that's like a
Yeah.
type of learning which is really important, and like our goal is to never impose our own bias on what we believe sexual harassment to be upon the algorithm. So, you know, depending on the person's culture, depending on their basic demographics, depending on their experience, the spectrum of sexual harassment is huge. You can People try to define it, and I think, you know, we prefer to go for a really simple definition of anything, you know, that is seen as having sexual intent that makes you feel uncomfortable, is
Mm.
sexual harassment. And really what's most important isn't the intent, but the impact that it
Mm.
has on the individual. So it has to be the individual that confirms, yes, this is sexual harassment with the
Yeah.
algorithm, rather than like a model doing it for you.
That's really cool. So it's based, like, you can say, like, there's an element of like artificial intelligence in this,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, I think that's so cool because obviously, I think the difficulty before that we touched on is that obviously the definition of sexual harassment differs per person. Like, and
Hmm.
it is really difficult. Like, for you as a team, it would have been pretty difficult for you to set what that definition is like you probably that bias of your own team would have been out in the algorithm, given like without this sort of artificial intelligence learning what your own definition is over time. I think that's really cool because as a tool, obviously artificial intelligence is under a lot of scrutiny where, people think it's going to take over the world, or like there's a lot of downside to it. But when you're actually using it to solve problems such as this, it just shows the power and it shows the strength if used in the right way, if used in the correct manner. It can really impact people's lives better for like 100%.
Definitely, and that's why we really want it to be, preventative as well, in the sense where, imagine if you say, like, as a company, say, oh, we now have this algorithm that kind of detects sexual harassment in real time. I think that sometimes people send messages that they don't realize, or they don't have, like, think twice about.
Mm.
They might think it's a joke or whatever, but then, this would be preventative in a way where someone would think twice before sending an inappropriate message. And
Yeah,
again, it's
100%.
really important to note here that, like, obviously it's all anonymous unless it's flagged and reported. And secondly, it's, it's not about saying that you can't send certain messages in the workplace. Like, if you have a friendly relationship with someone, you can send whatever you want. On the contrary, like, be my guest. But it's
Mm.
just, there's no place for like unconsensual sexualized behavior, unconsenting, sorry, sexualized behavior in the workplace. And so that's what we're
Mm.
really trying to kind of push, that is actually quite a black and white space, even though the spectrum
Yeah.
of sexual harassment is gray, like that is very black and white.
100%. I don't know. Let's talk about I guess, the timelines for developing a solution or an app like this, because I
Hmm.
know a lot of people listening will, if they've studied stuff around like data like you have, or if they're looking at a new solution for a problem that's existed for centuries or decades or whatever, like you have also, what's the sort of first initial things? What's the sort of timeline for something like that? As in, like, what did you do, and how can people kind of learn from what you
Hmm.
did to kind of launch a similar solution?
Definitely. So we're a team of 4 women, and all of us have somewhat a technical background. So um, my background is in data science, well, data analytics and machine learning engineering. My co-founder is in cybersecurity, and my we have a software developer and a quantitative analyst. And so when my Helena and I, my co-founder, started, we don't software develop, so we can't develop the app. Like, I tried,
Mm.
like, Python is great for data analytics and machine learning, but like it's not the best at all for, I mean, you can't develop an app.
Yeah.
And so we outsourced it originally to create our MVP, and like that was a big learning curve because we realized that we wanted to hire someone to work next to us the whole time. So that's when we hired a software developer, and she's been working with us now since Feb, and so the product's going to be released in 2 weeks, so early June. So that's kind of like a 2 months, January, February, March, April, May. It's 3 months to develop the reporting application. And then the case management system is going to take another month. And then the NLP is just about data collecting and then sophisticating the algorithm.
Mm.
So that's something that, to create a baseline model isn't too difficult, but we need, obviously, to then hire another developer to help us plug it into the existing systems. So that's
Yeah.
kind of our next challenge. But I mean, yeah, definitely for us, like, the main learning curve is, do your tech in-house, if possible, because then you get the product that you want. And, even if it takes a bit longer, it's still going to work out cheaper than doing it
Mm.
outsourced, I think.
Yeah. But even before the MVP, like there are stages to developing this. Like there's the research, and I guess
Mm,
like it's a mixture of, like, for Wing, my business, it was a mixture of uh I guess desk research, like Googling things, but also speaking
hmm.
to real people that
Yeah.
use or experience the problem day to day.
Hmm.
So was there an element of that as well? Because I guess
Yeah.
sexual harassment is something that's so difficult to kind of pinpoint as to
Yeah.
why people don't report. If people report, why aren't they reporting, basically, and like the sort of problems around that.
Definitely, yeah. So when we started, so we were doing our masters at the time, and so we were doing focus groups. So we did like groups of like 5 to 8, either all women or all men. and we would ask them basic questions about like how they perceived, like everything from like how they perceive sexual harassment to like where would you go if you needed to report something, and
Mm.
what has your experience been. So that was really, really insightful for us. And I think that's one of the most insightful things was obviously, that like there's this real lack of trust when people like
Mm.
experience sexual harassment. And there's also a lack of understanding of whether what you're experiencing is sexual harassment. So if like when we touched upon the definition, if you ask someone if they've been sexually harassed, the rate that they'll respond yes to is far lower than if you actually give them, oh, have you experienced these instances, like someone touched you inappropriately,
Yeah.
someone's made a snarky remark about your clothes, your gender, whatever. That number just jumps, like literally, it's basically like nearly 100% for women. For men, it's also really, really high. So I think like the focus groups made us realize like that really gray spectrum of what sexual harassment is, and like the lack of trust. So like I
Mm.
definitely think that you have to be speaking to people, and as many people as you can. And like obviously from my perspective, like I always want to be like creating like very clear data sets that we can analyze.
Mm.
But I think when you're doing focus groups, like you kind of have to let go of that and just think, okay, like, we'll take as many insights as we can. Like it doesn't have to be in
Yeah.
binary code to be insightful for you, like it doesn't. So that's definitely like the focus groups were really important to us.
It's quite funny because like if that's what you're aiming for, like binary sort of like data sources, this
Yeah,
is probably the least binary thing you'll come across
yeah,
as a problem,
literally.
because it's like such, there are so many gray areas, and when you're dealing with emotion, it's like people don't even, they're not even certain like what
Yeah,
answer, they don't even know like if it's a yes or a no.
yeah,
So yeah, it's a difficult one to set out in like a binary like data set. It's
yeah,
quite
yeah.
funny that you're the person that's doing that, if
I
you're
know.
enjoying the binary aspect.
I know, yeah, it's a conflict, but we're getting there.
So Eleanor, I'm guessing this is a, like when you do finally go out into the market and when you have the MVP, you will start selling to some companies as a software as a service, right? Like is that the aim?
Yeah, so we're B2B, and this is actually our beta. So like the MVP was tested already on a
Oh
couple
yeah,
of
yeah.
pilot projects. And so now we're like sorting out all of our pricing strategies. But yeah, ultimately it's, I mean, it fits under the broad SaaS kind of umbrella, but like, we're also defined as like HR tech, legal tech
Mm.
because of the compliancy issue with the whistleblowing directive, fem tech because we're helping gender equality. So like, I mean, people like boxes and binary code, so that's that's why we're defined like that.
Yeah. So what's the reception been like from businesses? Because I mean, I've had people on the podcast before where they're trying to sell software as a service to businesses, and it's in areas such as like mental health or
Hmm.
exercise or stuff like that, and it's not always received that positively, because obviously you're selling to people high up in these companies because they're the ones with the budget,
Yeah,
but it's these people that they might have that sort of old view of the world, and I know that's like a big generalization. But like from speaking to people on the podcast before, I remember Damien, who was trying to sell, I can't remember what episode, it was a long time ago now, but he was trying to sell like mental health reporting in companies, and like he got a similar backlash from a lot of
hmm,
companies saying, oh no, it's fine, everyone in our company's okay, like we don't need this.
right.
So
It's very
what's the
much needed.
reception? It's awful, yeah, I know. But what's the reception been like for your product, like from businesses?
So I think it's really important to make the distinction between your champions and your like the decision makers. So for us, it's really important that we find our champions. And to be honest, finding a champion when it comes to like gender equality and things like sexual harassment, it tends to be like quite easy. Like if if someone's quite turned on, like you can find someone within HR or even an employee to kind of bring it up to higher management, say, why don't we have this? So I think that's our strategy ultimately, is like, okay,
Mm.
find the champion and they convince the decision makers. Because if we go straight in with the decision makers, like we're going to get resistance. Nonetheless, we're really fortunate that we're operating under this legal framework, which states that all EU companies with more than 50 employees have to have a reporting system for whistleblowing. So we're basically, it's not just an ethical and a financial issue, because we can bring up loads of numbers about how much sexual harassment is costing them, how much they're losing in employees, but when it comes to like legal, this is kind of similar to like a GDPR issue where it's like, okay,
Mm,
you need to have something like us or do it internally, but it's a headache. So we can do this for you externally and like make sure that it's way more smooth running, make sure that your employees are happy, and then provide you insights based on that.
mm. That's really cool. Like, I think it's like perfect timing for you when this legal framework coming up. It's like
Yeah.
perfect.
I know we didn't know about it until like a couple months into the business, and then we were like, oh my
Wow,
God. It's like,
wow,
yeah, it's amazing.
wow. That's really good timing. But I was going to ask because I know a lot of people starting a business or thinking about starting a business within B2B software as a service or like trying to sell to
Hmm.
businesses. Trying to find that champion can be quite tricky. Where
Yeah,
like, even if that person exists, they might not even exist in the company, right?
yeah.
So how's your strategy been trying to find that champion within the company? Because something like sexual harassment isn't something that's advertised on LinkedIn. You can't find someone
Yeah,
who's been sexually harassed before to say, listen, like we could have stopped
yeah,
that or stuff like that because it's obviously it's not public information. So
yeah.
how for people trying to sell within businesses, trying to find their champion, how can people do that?
I think there's a couple of cues that you can get. Like we're not necessarily looking for like the term sexual harassment. So like for
Mm,
example, to find a champion, we'd be looking perhaps at like imagine if we choose like okay, today we'll look at LinkedIn for this specific company, and we look at gender equality. Does anyone say anything about gender equality? Does anyone say anything about whistleblowing? Does anyone say anything about social corporate responsibility, impact, positive impact, mental health? So it's just like we always say that we need someone who's receptive, and the way that they're receptive is that if they have that like their eyes are open to the problem. So that
mm,
when I go up to them and I'm like sexual harassment, they're like, yeah, big problem. Um, whilst we don't want to be targeting individuals that their eyes are closed and they don't know that sexual harassment is a problem, because that's just too much of a headache for us to like convince someone to change their mentality like that. We like perhaps the decision makers aren't perhaps the decision makers don't actually know that it's a problem, but if you have champions and your employees demanding something like that, in addition to a legal framework that requires it for you, like that's
mm.
really going to be the current pushing us through.
Do you think that will be really key to your growth once you release the beta, once you try to get more businesses on board, is trying to identify that person that will
Yeah.
take your solution, lift it higher into the business to get the key, stakeholders to engage?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's critical. I think it's critical for a lot of social impact companies, because
Mm,
unfortunately, like if you go in and say, oh, I can save you this much money, it tends to be like a more like an easier offering to give, than to say, oh, we want to make your employees better, like to make them feel better,
mm,
which seems mad, but it's like the sad reality of businesses
yeah,
today. So you just need it, like we just need the argument to be so strong that like they can't think of anything to say against them. So that's
yeah,
why we come in with like ethical, financial, and legal.
yeah. So when you do go on LinkedIn to find these people, I don't know if that's your like main strategy for finding these people, but I guess do you go on the company page? Do you go on like the individual employees? And then you have to, I guess, like rank by seniority to some extent. It does sound like quite a difficult thing. So practically, do you mind just like breaking it down slightly?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, obviously, this is just the start of our sales cycle, and I'm by no means a salesperson, so like, I'm probably not going to
Okay.
be giving the best advice here. But yeah, I think what we're starting to do is actually within our network or being introduced, so like warm intros to people. I think is like if you can get a warm introduction, that's key, and like
Mm,
especially within the startup world, and like there's I mean, we're based in Madrid, like we have enough connections to get us started, to get us warm intros into like the big companies. And after that, like ultimately, because we want to become a norm, when other companies start seeing their competitors acquiring a solution like ours, we expect it to also be, because obviously we're compliance. So like companies are going to be looking for a solution like ours. So like it's not just going to be, it's going to be inbound and outbound sales for us.
Mm. Okay, that's really cool. I'm really looking forward to the beta releasing and
Yeah,
for
me too.
companies to kind of for the companies to well, you have the legal frameworks there and for companies to actually take this seriously because there's so many social issues that big companies kind of they say they care about, but
Yeah,
then when like push comes to shove and like the money's on the table, they might not care about it
exactly.
as much. Um, it's just the kind of reality of it. But with like a legal push on the horizon, a solution like yours is like perfectly placed. So I'm like massively excited to see what happens from there. And yeah, I'm really happy to have you on the podcast before I guess it goes a bit mental for you once you release the beta. So Eleanor, it's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. So how could people stay in touch with you and stay in touch with Metaspace in the future? Because I'm sure people want to follow it before and during the beta launch.
Yeah, definitely. So we're quite active on LinkedIn. You can find us under Metaspace. So yeah, obviously right now, like our two main priorities is we're opening a new round of funding and we're launching the beta. So we're always open to connecting to new individuals. With that, anyone who has a company or knows of has works within a company that thinks a solution like ours, don't feel free to reach out. And lastly, we have an ambassador program that is filled currently with 50 incredible individuals who are also passionate about gender equality, creating better workplaces, and helping us on our mission to eradicate sexual harassment. So if anyone wants to join that, they can find the sign up page on our website.
Cool. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Eleanor, for coming on the podcast. I'm sure people have absolutely loved it. So yeah, thank you so much again, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.